efforts to modernize and update ammunition production and the progress made on these efforts since we last had a hearing on this back in September of 20. We are in person without masks, so I want to first say how good it is to see everyone. It's been a rough couple of years when it has come to the pandemic, but the good news is I believe we're on the other side of it. Doesn't mean we're completely out of the woods, but being with people and having an exchange, I think, is just so much more beneficial. But together we did get through it. So welcome back. And for those on remote, it's good to have you here. And let us continue. The hearing was the start of an ongoing conversation between our committee and the Army, improving the state of conventional ammunition production facilities across the country. Both Congress and the Army are certainly aware of the facilities long due for modernization, and I can't emphasize that enough. I have had the honor of visiting several of these, and having someone who came out of an industrial background, shocking is not overstating the condition of some of our facilities. And I know I'm speaking to those here that understand that, but we want to make sure that when we start talking about single points of failure and supply chain, particularly in an environment that we're living in today in this world, to say this is more important than ever is also an understatement. So the production progress, the tooling, the facilities are all operating much like they did during the Second World War, and that is certainly true. Since September 20, our last hearing, 2 NDAs have come and gone, and in both bills, this committee supported the Army in addition to the baseline, the unfunded priorities, and that was meant to kickstart the process, excuse me, of upgrading, modernization, and safe, efficient production of conventional ammunition. Once again, this year, the budget request does not appear to adequately prioritize the conditions we're looking at to modernize, and we have been very focused on this. So, while it's encouraging to see some movement, the Army is paying closer attention to these facilities. We remain concerned that the Army will lose momentum if these efforts aren't sufficiently funded in the base budget. The Army should not rely on unfunded priorities for these efforts. If these facilities are meant to continue to operate in critical strategic assets that everyone recognizes they are, the funding needs to reflect the importance. And I just want to take a quick moment of deviation from my prepared remarks and just reference the conversations that had been on everybody's lips in this building and others talking about the Stinger and the Javelin. Without Holston, without Radford, that does not happen. As a way to encouraging the Army to achieve realistic and affordable modernization, committee included a provision in this year's NDAA requiring the Army to submit to Congress its facilities master plan documenting planned upgrades and improving to the 5 government-owned contractor-operated GOCO ammo plants. We're looking forward to reviewing those plans, and as part of our oversight, and I was up till 1:30 in the morning because we're just receiving them, going through them, and we're going to have a number of questions concerning that, both today and moving on. Modernizing these facilities is and will continue to be important to the warfighters and to our industrial partners, the long-term ability to protect our nation. Today, we're pleased that representatives from both the contractors who operate these facilities will be joining the conversation. The people who execute the production and their operation of these sites, their perspective on what the Army is doing, as well as their thoughts on what can be improved, is incredibly important. And today we're pleased to welcome, after being officially confirmed in his new role, as I did welcome him home, is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, Technology, the Honorable Doug Bush. Great to have you here. And we also welcome back General Daly, Commanding General of Army Materiel Command. Good to have you back, General. and first time to the committee at least, the Brigadier General Gavin Gardner, Commander of Joint Munitions Command, and Brigadier General William Bordoff, Program PEO for Armaments and Ammunition up at Picatinny, which Mikey represents in New Jersey. We're looking forward to their observation ideas how the Army will continue to modernize and improve ammunition production. We also have, in the second panel today, we'll hear from our industrial partners I referenced who operate these GOCO sites. First, we have Brett Floyer, President of Olin Winchester. Olin operates Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Independence, Missouri, which we visited with Ms. Hartzler. Jason Gaines, Senior Vice President, General Manager of Munition Systems at General Dynamics, and they operate the GOCO out of Scranton Army Ammunition Plant, which is on my list. If it wasn't for the pandemic, we would have been there already. And Brian Gaithright, Vice President, General Manager, BAE Systems Ordnance, both Radford and Holston's, which we both have visited, one being in Kingsport and the other one in Radford, Virginia. And John McGinnis, Brigadier General retired, President of American Ordnance, operating in Iowa Army Ammunition Plant in Middletown, Iowa. But first, I want to turn to Ranking Member and our good friend from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, for any opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to start off and commend everyone for the wonderful job that you did during COVID to keep those plants opened and to keep this capability in production. It's just key, and I know that was an all-hands-on-deck endeavor. And so I just appreciate the work that you did there to make sure that that kept going, because we can't our adversaries don't give up and take time off, and so we had to do it, but you guys did. So thank you for that, and I want to thank our chairman for his continued partnership in keeping this critical topic at a key focus of the subcommittee's oversight efforts. As you know, we oversee all the acquisition for the Air Force and the Army and the tactical air assets for the Navy and the Marines, so there's a lot in our portfolio, but this is so key, and I just appreciate that focus. And I'm pleased for this opportunity to be here with our witnesses again to receive an update on the Army's plans and the ongoing efforts to modernize the production of conventional ammunition. As the leadership of this subcommittee, the chairman and I have given this topic our personal attention over the past 5 years, as he mentioned, as you know. In addition to the funding increases and reporting requirements this committee has sponsored in the last 2 NDAAs, we have personally conducted site visits to the 5 government-owned, contractor-operated ammunition production facilities to get a better idea firsthand of the modernization, safety, and operational challenges and the needs that these facilities are dealing with. And as the chairman said, as you know, many of these facilities were built during World War II. And yet we need that capability today just as much, if not more. So it's important that these facilities are modern and safe and operational. These ammunition plants are vital to nearly all munition programs for the U.S. military and the long-term defense of our nation. Many of these plants have been around, as I said, since World War II, and they need improvements. Modernization facilities and machinery, safety upgrades, and the increased reliability of ammunition production are essential for establishing and sustaining a resilient defense industrial base capable of meeting future combat requirements while better supporting both the warfighter and our industrial base partners and workers. As the chairman already mentioned, in addition to increasing the ammunition procurement funding in the past 2 NDAAs, we also include a provision in the FY22 NDAA requiring the Army to provide Congress on a 5-year reoccurring basis the Army's master plans and investment strategy for implementing upgrades and improvements for the 5 government-owned, contractor-operated ammunition plants. With the first submission of the Army's plans due today, I expect our witnesses to provide an overview of these plans and their implementation status during their testimony here today. While I commend our witnesses for your efforts in taking on and addressing the matter of modernizing these facilities, I share the chairman's concerns that the Army continues to insufficiently fund these efforts in the base budget. Unfortunately, the President's proposed budget for FY 2023, publicly released this past Monday, appears to be much of the same, continuing the trend of using ammunition procurement and production-based support accounts as bill payers for other Army priorities. And I also want to hear, and I'm concerned about, with all the munitions and weapons that we are giving Ukraine during this conflict, the Stingers and the Javelins, do we see increased production reflected in what you're proposing this year to backfill those things as well? So I hope you will address that. I expect our witnesses today to address all these concerns and specifically provide how the Army is prioritizing modernization, funding to ensure the necessary upgrades for manufacturing, safety, and infrastructure improvements will be accomplished for this critical industrial base. And like I said, I'm adding a second one here, ad lib, but to make sure, I want to hear more information about how we are replacing the Javelins and the Stingers and the ammunition, frankly, that we are sending over to Ukraine. Are we sufficiently backfilling that as well as to meet our own needs? So I thank the witnesses for their dedicated service. I look forward to hearing from you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up the idea of something that we talk about everywhere. And in normal times, it's a dangerous, tough job at those ammunition plants, those depots. During the pandemic, it was incredible, the work that they continue to do, even in the early days when we weren't quite sure what was going on. So to all of you who participated in that, please make sure that you relay back to those folks on the line how much we really do appreciate that. And to our witnesses to here today, we've seen the conditions. We understand the complexity of how we got to where we are. And amazingly, you make it work, even in the toughest of circumstances. But there is risk. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So as I understand it, the Honorable Doug Bush will be leading off with the statements for our panel. So, sir.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you to discuss the Army's progress on efforts to modernize production of conventional ammunition across the industrial base. I'm pleased to be joined by General Ed Daly and Brigadier Generals Bill Boroff and Gavin Gardner. We appreciate you making our written statement part of the record for today's hearing. I also want to acknowledge our industrial base partners that will be testifying later today, and more importantly, acknowledge, as both of you did, the workforce at these facilities who worked through COVID. As you've seen, they work in very difficult conditions at times and keep things going and supply the joint force and our allies with ammunition they need. It's a credit to that workforce that we've been able to keep on track, and we owe it to them to improve those facilities. And I just let you know that I'm committed to that, and I believe the Army is committed to that. Mr. Chairman, as the single manager for conventional ammunition for the entire Department of Defense, the Army is responsible for providing superior products, reliable sources of supply, at economies of scale to meet joint warfighter and coalition partner requirements in peacetime, wartime, and during national emergencies. I'm pleased to report that there have been no significant shortfalls in conventional ammunition production, despite COVID and other challenges, and the Army is committed to ensuring that ammunition remains available, reliable, and affordable. A vital part of the Army's commitment to continually meet warfighter ammunition requirements is the urgent need to improve production facilities and manufacturing processes to enhance worker safety, reduce environmental impacts, and sustain production continuity. Let me emphasize that our highest priority among those is improving worker safety by incorporating the latest automation technology to, over time, reduce worker exposure to hazardous situations. To guide our way forward, the Army has developed a comprehensive Army ammunition plant modernization plan that, if supported by members, will result in a more resilient, safe, environmentally compliant, and effective organic ammunition industrial base. In addition to our holistic modernization plan, the Army is also focused on eliminating single-point failures, as well as securing the full munitions supply chain through the identification and mitigation of foreign dependency in high-risk areas. While we are exploring new production processes to enhance capacity and improve resiliency, rebuild organic capabilities, and develop new ways to leverage innovation and technologies within the National Industrial Base. Additionally, automated supply chain risk management tools will help us identify and monitor potentially problematic sources of supply and proactively identify potential commercial sources capable of supporting requirements. Before turning to General Daly for his statement, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to discuss conventional ammunition production and for your continued support of our soldiers, civilians, and their families. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman O'Cross, Ranking Member Hartzler, distinguished members of the subcommittee, good morning. I truly appreciate the opportunity to testify today with my colleagues on the modernization of the Army's organic industrial base. 18 months ago, Chairman, as you mentioned, we committed to providing Congress with a comprehensive modernization plan for the Army's organic industrial base. With guidance and intent from both the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Army and in close partnership with ASALT, I'm proud to testify today that we have met our commitment. We recently produced a 15-year Army modernization plan for the entire OIB, which includes all depots and arsenals as well as ammunition plants. And within the ammunition plant community, both contractor and government operated. As the Army undergoes the greatest transformation in more than 40 years, the 15-year OIB modernization plan represents a once-in-a-generation chance to holistically modernize. With collaboration, input, and feedback from our industry partners, consulting companies, and academia, the plan provides a deliberate and comprehensive roadmap to a 21st century OIB focused on processes, facilities, equipment, workforce, data and information technology, as well as energy and cyber resilience. This three-phase plan represents an estimated $16 billion investment, $8+ billion of which will upgrade ammunition sites alone. This effort will be significant in bringing our ammunition plant capabilities into the 21st century. Critical to modernization efforts are minimizing human exposure to hazards through robotics and remote operating processes, seeking to reduce single points of failure and dependence on foreign suppliers, and building capacity and capability to support the Army and the Joint Force as we move into the future, all while sunsetting and divesting of legacy equipment, facilities, and processes. As Honorable Bush mentioned, the Army, as a single manager for conventional ammunition, has excelled for more than 4 decades in areas of acquisition, production, stockpile accountability, and distribution management. ASALT, Army Material Command, and the ammunition lifecycle managers are completely integrated and synchronized in our roles and responsibilities. Together, we're absolutely committed to providing the Joint Force and our nation's allies with quality ammunition and being responsive at the tactical points of need. AMC directly supports ASALT across the munitions lifecycle, producing, storing, distributing, surveilling, and demilitarizing conventional munitions, with a dedicated workforce of more than 10,000 skilled artisans. And I appreciate, Chairman, you mentioning that today about their professionalism and what they do each and every day. Ammunition plants remain critical to our national defense, and I can unequivocally attest to the performance and responsiveness of the ammunition OIB. Ammunition plants are serving their fundamental purpose of supporting current munitions requirements, maintaining surge core capability and capacity for potential large-scale combat operations, and posturing to support future modern weapon systems. We have made some progress over the past several years, but now opportunities are replete for real momentum going forward. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you again for allowing me to appear before you. We truly appreciate Congress's continued support of the Army's OIB, and specifically this subcommittee's support of the Army's ammunition plants. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Are we going to hear testimony? Okay, just to you. First of all, thank you for your remarks, and certainly touch base on a number of the areas that we're going to touch onto today. I just want to start out by setting the framework. We have ongoing operations that are taking place in the facilities the way they sit today. And we talked about you're making it work, but we all know there's risk involved in that. And you provided a plan that we're looking into and have questions on today moving forward. We switched over to the GOCO configuration back right at the Second World War, so it would be flexible. that we could use the advantage of having industry and what they bring to the table and be able to ramp up when we needed it and to ramp down. And it's worked, but it's being stressed simply because of the modernization, and obviously we change weapons and the way they work. With the modernization plan, and you talk about 15 years, and we talk about the base budget, which was released just the other day. General Daly, does this fully fund in the appropriate time frame your modernization plan? Because typically, in something that is in dire need of upgrading, you see a large influx of assets in the beginning, because that's where your greatest need is for planning, design, construction. But I'm not seeing it in the base budget the way it came out. So could you be on how this gets done in 15 years with the priorities that we're talking about?
Chairman, thank you for that question. The way we've structured the 15-year plan is in 3 phases, as I mentioned. The first phase is really building a foundation for 21st century capabilities, really getting at the most critical processes and capabilities that we need immediately. The second phase is really expanding those 21st century capabilities and reducing our vulnerabilities, as we mentioned. And then the third phase is really continuing to expand beyond that. And I would just tell you, Chairman, that all 3 phases are linked in with the modernization efforts of both the Army and the Joint Force. To answer your question in terms of funding and programming, I feel comfortable that with the way we've laid this out, it's feasible in terms of execution, and that we can still maintain the capabilities that we need in stride to support the organic industrial base requirements over time, and that it is realistic in terms of its programming requirements in terms of the out years. I know you're specifically talking about the budget for 23, but in the follow-on years, as I mentioned, being 15 years, I feel comfortable that the Army recognizes the importance of the investment.
Thank you for that answer, but let me follow, and I'm looking at the chart that was released, and I know it'll be tough from there, but essentially the budget each year is flatlined across there. And what I'm getting to is, from what we've seen and what you know and what is reported, the risk that we are facing today because of the condition of the facilities. And typically, you would see a larger influx in the beginning because this is where we're trying to catch up. Why aren't we seeing that in the plan? Let's put the budget submission aside. Maybe, Mr. Bush, are you able to?
If I could, sir, yes. So I believe ammunition plants specifically, the Army is on a steady level of $500 million a year, 23 through 27, varying between 499.6 in 23 to a peak of 518.9 in 27. That is based on our understanding of that's historically high, and it's sustained.
No question.
So not peaks and valleys. I can also assure you that when I was there last year and we were working on this budget, this committee's attention to this issue absolutely makes a difference. So members going to plants, talking about it in hearings, conducting oversight absolutely helps us in the Army make sure that these funds are protected across the board. There are potential opportunities to accelerate some of the projects that we would be happy to share with the committee on request. However, sir, there is a limitation on how much funding we can put through this process based on the timelines for construction, planning and construction, while continuing to operate the plants. But we're happy to work through opportunities to accelerate with you, sir.
So we'll get into that a little bit more, and certainly our partners who have shared with us in the past some of their thoughts on doing that. But the good news is, yes, historically high numbers, but it is needed incredibly. Let me just follow up with that, because as we were visiting the plants, the one facility at Radford has a relatively new complex that was getting ready to come online. Incredible facility. The original budget for that facility and the timeline that was laid out, radically different, much longer. It's hard to say there's a typical building, particularly in this type of area, but what's the timeline from you've laid out a plan here for modernization? We know what facilities need to be done. What are we expecting? Because in the past, we haven't really met those. How is this going to be different for these facilities that we're going to be able to lay out the budget, the timeline, and actually roll them on when we need it?
So, sir, if I may, I have our two experts here at the far ends of the table, General Boroff and General Gardner. I could let General Boroff speak specifically about the Radford plant you're talking about that might illuminate some of the larger issues you're pointing to.
Great.
Thank you, Chairman. At the Radford plant, as you know, the nitrocellulose facility that we're referring to, it is on schedule to open up later this summer, so we're excited about that. There were some construction delays as we transitioned some of the partners. We let one of the partners go, and the contractor that runs the plant now took it over.
So would you please, and forgive me for interrupting, is that this was a design build versus a government design build?
It was. What we do, sir, is we do a 30% design, and then we go through about 2 years. Then we do the 60% design, and then once we have the 60% design, we lock it in after 2 years. Then we go to the 90% design about 2 years later. So that's the design phase. I'll use an example of the ammunition plant that we're building for the 6.8. We've just done our second charrette out at Lake City, where we're working hand in hand with the operating contractor as we go through and build that facility. We've been planning that for about 2 years now. And once we get the down select for the next generation squad weapon, we'll be able to dive into that with the contractor to build that facility out correctly.
So the design build is the way that you're looking at for this modernization plan versus there's several other methods you can look at. Are you comfortable with those design build and getting it in on time and budget?
As to the 6.8, yes, we are comfortable with that. We just went through our second charrette there with the operating contractor. We're using their facility as an example. With the government requirements compared to their requirements, they were able to stand their facility up in about 9 to 15 months. Ours we're estimating about 2 years. The reason for that is the extensive safety requirements that we have as a federal government that they do not have to do on the commercial side.
That's what I'm looking to get at. Could you just give us some clarity on what some of those advantages are that they have that we don't?
So we have to have fire extinguishing processes. We have to have the halogen fire extinguishers at all the bays. They have to have in certain bays where they're just handling certain materials. But our safety professionals came in and said, no, we need them at all bays. So that's a design piece that we didn't have off of their plant out of Oxford, Mississippi, that we're mirroring to go to our 6.8 facility. So we have to add the extra safety things in. So we have the DOD and the OSD safety folks come in and advise us what we must and what we need to do for safety. And that adds the time and the additional cost from the commercial sector.
I'm not sure if safety is the one we want to hone in on trying to save money on, but certainly some of the other areas other than safety, typically an ammo plant, fire extinguishers are not a bad thing, and we certainly would do it. But let me
Chairman, if I could, I think the other big concern that Honorable Bush and I have going forward is the continued escalation of building materials and labor in this process. And so as we go forward, we just need to continue to look at this. And as we revisit the modernization plan every year, obviously adjusting accordingly based on those potential escalation in prices.
Right. We'll get more to that, but I want to give my colleagues a chance. Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you. The first question was dealing with the 6.8 and the new Next Generation Squad Weapon Program at Lake City. So you may have answered it, but I just wanted to make sure. I was just wondering how you're planning to integrate this new round into the production at Lake City, and if you could walk us through some of the facility modernization projects that is going on there. So can you clarify between, you said there's already a facility, but you're building a new one. Anyway, just kind of clarify what's going on there.
I can. Thank you for the question. So For the 6-8 facility, we're actually demolishing an old building on the installation. We're doing that now. That doesn't partake in where we need to go for the new facility. We're waiting for the down select. And as you know, that will happen probably in the next month or two. So once that down select is made, whomever wins that, they have a 10-year responsibility to build the ammunition. About 2 years into it, in 24, 26 timeframe, they'll start working with us. They'll work before that, but we'll actually have a building then. They'll start working on the building with us to make sure we have the facility set up to optimize it as we move forward. And then they will be our second source for ammunition in the future, the winning contractor for whatever round we start building at the ammunition plant.
So what's the first source?
It'll be us. So in 26, we'll be the primary source. 26, 28, we'll take over the mass production of that said round. And our second source will be the winning contractor. So we'll always have a domestic second source, ma'am.
So you build the building, but you work with them on what needs to be inside.
We build the building, we work with the operating contractor, and they work with that winning contractor vendor, and we team together to build the government plant. That's correct, ma'am.
Very good. Okay, great. And Honorable Bush, you mentioned in your statement something that I wanted to hear more about. What are some of the most specific single points of failure and single foreign sources in the ammunition production supply chain that need to be addressed? This is something I'm very concerned about, and I think most everybody in Congress, especially after COVID, are concerned about our dependence on other countries, and certainly as we're producing ammo. So can you kind of let us know what are some of those single points of failure as well as foreign sources?
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. I'll start way out if I could. So, our ammunition production partners and the government, are in a global marketplace for example, precursor chemicals.
Yeah.
I'm confident that we have a good understanding of those supply chains and where chemicals, for example, come from. That can come from, in some cases, China, but also some cases India, but also a lot of NATO allies and partners. And we do a lot of work with Canada, for example. So I believe we have a good visibility of that supply chain. That's step one. Step two is what you're referring to, which is mitigation. So we are constantly looking at ways to qualify additional sources. If necessary, work with our vendors to shift sources from countries less friendly to the United States to more, if it's something that we don't produce in the United States. But that's ongoing work, ma'am. The details of which sources tie to which weapons are sensitive information that I could provide in a different form, but we do have examples of that, ma'am.
Can you say generally some of these sensitive, critical sources that are not available in our country, do we have the capacity to build them here? I mean, do we have those minerals in the ground in some mountain somewhere that we could, if we had the right policy, be able to source from here?
Well, ma'am, I think probably yes, if we chose to. We can do anything in America. We could build all these things. We could have chemical plants. We have them to produce materials. I think it's a question of, as you mentioned, policy. So the degree to which you're comfortable with us sourcing from friendly countries, for example, but also some that are a little less friendly. And those are individual choices we need to make, and happy to work with you on specific examples where you have serious concerns and illuminate our detailed plans.
I would like that. I would be very interested in sitting down with you in a different setting and getting a briefing on what some of those materials are and what we need to do here, because I just think we're very vulnerable. There's a lot of bad guys in the world, and we need to become self-sufficient in many of these defensive capabilities. So thank you. So I wanted to ask again, Mr. Bush, having personally visited several of these ammunition plants and witnessed the dangerous conditions in which some of these manufacturing processes are currently operating, I'm specifically pleased the Army is including machinery and facilities investments in automation and remote operations, and you mentioned that. And you specifically mentioned such plans for the modernization at Lake City. So can you provide an update on how these efforts are progressing and what challenges still remain?
Yes, ma'am. If I could start and then turn to my expert colleagues, if I may. Overall, as you've seen when you visited the plants, they are a combination of brand new things and very old things.
Right.
So one building right beside another, one might be very modern and one might be of serious concern, as you saw. So I think we are making progress, but it will take time. If I could defer to my expert colleagues to add a little more detail
Sure.
on some specific examples.
Thank you, ma'am. So as you know, it's in the study you'll read, we work with Sandia Labs to identify a lot of the safety issues as we go through. They broke it down in 3, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10, 10 to 15, and the recommendations we go through. We're looking at the infrastructure as we go through to make sure as we put those facilities in, and specifically at Lake City, you know, we're looking at cameras. A lot of inspections done by the people, by the energetics. Honorable Bush and General Days, they both spoke to one of our highest priorities, safety and getting the folks away from energetics. So looking at cameras to do some of the inspections for the primers, I know you've seen that. It's a lot of hands-on. Getting them away from that and having cameras do that, that's what we're looking at, working with Sandia Labs.
So the cameras will do the inspecting, right? I mean, you still
Right.
have to have the hands-on putting the primer in the bullet.
We're also looking at automating that, automation to make that done with robotics. But that is, we've got to make sure we have the right infrastructure before we start putting those type of things in.
That's what I wanted to hear. And who pays for that? Is that the contractor, or will you be buying the robot?
So that comes out of our PAA money, Procurement Army Ammunition funding that you give us, and we really appreciate it. At the GO-COs, we do that type of funding. It's different at the other installations we talk about, but that is our money that we plan with. The contractors can put, and they do invest their own funding. You'll hear that later this afternoon. And so we do partner with them often as we do these endeavors.
Okay, great. And the last question, I want to get my colleagues' opportunity, but back to my original question. I have 2 goals today: to hear more about the modernization efforts and what we're doing and increase safety and production capability. But the other is to address the shortfalls or what's going on with Ukraine and other parts of the world. So what's the status of the Javelin, Stinger, and ammo inventory that we have now? And does the President's budget adequately address these transfers and needs to backfill, plus to make sure shore up what we have?
So, ma'am, it's a multi-part thing. One thing Congress already did, and thank you, was provide $3.5 billion in the omnibus, a fund that we can draw from to replenish weapons and equipment provided to Ukraine. So we already have that money. Congress will very soon get the first of several responses showing how we intend to use that funding. It'll be specifically to Stinger and Javelin, so that is imminent. That first, you'll see the plan to address that near-term thing. The Army has also transferred large amounts of conventional ammunition, as you noted, ma'am. So I expect, I'm working with my DoD colleagues, that will be also something we notify you of using to replenish our stocks out of that $3.5 billion. So that will be money we already have that once approved by Congress, it's a notification process. Once approved, we will get that immediately into the ammo plants to start rebuilding our stocks. Ma'am, if I could, about the different risk areas, it varies. In some cases, what we've provided is a tiny amount of our overall stocks. In other areas, it's a more significant amount. The details are classified, but we can provide those, and you would see which areas are more concerning than others.
Very good. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Sherrill?
Thank you. And General Boroff, I want to thank you for hosting myself and Mr. Bush and local elected leaders. It was really a wonderful visit, and everyone shared my real pride in the incredible work that you and the men and women at Picatinny do. So thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Bush, for coming up to Jersey. We appreciate it. So, Secretary Bush, I think we can all agree on the need to bring our ammunition plants into the 21st century. From your perspective, how do we foster the kind of change necessary to modernize the ammunition industrial base?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. And yes, it was great to get up to Picatinny and see that amazing workforce in your district. Thank you. Well, we have to lead, so the government needs to lead. As I mentioned, under legislation, the Secretary of the Army is responsible for being the single manager for the entire department, so we can't expect others. And I think it starts with what General Daley was referring to, sustained funding across the FIDUP, that we can work with our industry partners to get things moving. I think there's been a definite change in tone in the discussions in the Army with regard to this, and it's largely a product of the great work the committee's done on doing oversight here. So keeping that going helps us as we tussle for resources inside the Army to make sure that these things remain well-funded. So that's one, ma'am. The other is we need to be, and if I may defer to General Daly for a couple specifics, thoughtful and flexible about how we do this, so we're doing it in a modern way and not just falling back into all of our old practices that, as the chairman was referring to, can sometimes add time where it's not necessary.
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. And just to expand on what Honorable Bush mentioned, in terms of framework, the way we've worked this new modernization plan, we did it a little bit differently than in the past. If you were to look at our master planning efforts at each depot, arsenal, and ammunition plant, you would pick up a hard copy document that was done recurringly over a several-year period. And it wasn't dynamic and fluid in nature and didn't really keep up, in some cases, with industry standards and processes. What you'll see now is the transition from those hard copy documents to a data repository that's dynamic, flexible in nature, and that's revisited on an annual basis. And we'll provide the committee with, the subcommittee with that information. But really, not only in terms of the way we looked at how we modernize, but the processes and framework we looked at to get at this modernization effort over time, so that if we can accelerate in certain cases based on funding, we will. If we have cost escalations where we have to defer, we know exactly what moves and we can hold ourselves accountable to the execution of that comprehensive plan that will bring us into the 21st century.
Thank you. And Secretary Bush, what role do you envision for JPEO ANA in these efforts, and how is Picatinny, as the home of both the JPEO and the Armament Center, uniquely qualified to carry out that vision?
Yes, ma'am. Picatinny, and more importantly, the people who work there, are absolutely vital and essential to any of this coming together. So as you saw from your visit, that is both a facility where we have people who just manage ongoing contracts and production, but also, just as important, the future. So that workforce that does research and development on, for example, the range of new munitions we're going to need for the extended range cannon artillery system, which I think is only going to be more and more once that is fielded. And as you're seeing from the current conflict, the importance of precision at range and what it can do, I think I only see growth. So I believe that the amazingly talented workforce we have there, as the Army rebuilds its long-range fires capability in particular, but also invests in new small arms ammunition, is only going to see more and more work.
Thank you. And General Boroff, did you have anything to add?
Ma'am, thank you for your visit. Having you there and Honorable Bush there was fantastic for the workforce, showing them the importance of what they do. And as Honorable Bush said, we're working the requirements as we go in the out years. We're working with long-range fires. We're working with the cross-functional teams and making sure whatever the new weapons are, we're building the rounds at Scranton. We're taking them out to Iowa. We're doing the LAP there, which is a load assemble. And then we're bringing all that back together to the industrial base. So we're using the whole OIB for these efforts. As has been said before, the 6-8, that's all controlled out of Picatinny, ma'am. So even though it's in other states, that's the nexus of where all the planning starts, working hand in hand with General Garner at the other end of the table at those respective plants. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I would love to go on, but my time is up, so I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. I'd like to get the panelists' perspective on where we are in the risk we face today. If you go to 2017, the Association of the United States Army Institute of Land Warfare did a study looking at production of munitions and what the challenges were from that point going forward. What they found in the 2017 study is that about a third of the 3,000 different types of ammunition were actually under supply. So we weren't producing what we needed within that realm. What they also found in that study was that 25% of the current munition stores that we have are 25 years of age or older. So as we look at the risk we take on with aging munition stores, with lack of production capability, I think that's an unacceptable risk. So I want to get your perspective on where do we see the future need, and I say future starting tomorrow, the future need not only in the munitions that we need to counter the challenges in front of us, but also how do we get that production capability in place and operational as quickly as possible? A great example is we're using up lots of Javelins and lots of Stingers. The Stinger is a circa 1960s weapons platform. Listen, very, very, very effective, but the question is, if we're going to go into production, large scale, to replace the ones that we're using, is it a wise thing to reproduce a circa 1960s platform, or is it something that we ought to look at, something like the Starstreak 2, 2007, a pretty incredible weapon? If we're going to be doing that recapitalization, shouldn't we be looking in the future? So I want to get your perspective on where things are in the future. And then what are you doing in communications with the industrial base? They have an incredibly important part of this. They are the innovators and creators, and to me, you can leverage them in a lot of different ways. So I wanted to get the panel's perspective on that.
Mr. Whitman, if I could start, sir, on the Stinger specific. I think the approach the Army is going to take, as you know, we have current requirement for the current weapon, which, as you note, is a classic design but still effective. So I believe we are going to use funding provided by Congress to replenish weapons similar to what we provided our current weapon. However, the Army has a requirement underway, work on a requirement for a new missile potentially underway that will look at the future you're talking about. So I think all the above, sir. So I think we need to get Stinger back in production to replenish our what we've sent, and also to support likely allies requesting more weapons than have happened today. So we're trying to get ahead of that, but also look to start, once the Army decides, a research and development effort to look at a potential new missile with perhaps greater range, sir. But that process in the Army is still underway to determine what the requirements would be for that. But I expect us to do both, sir.
Sir, if I may,
Congressman, let me go first, if you want. Congressman, just to add on to what Honorable Bush mentioned, first I would just tell you that as the Army Acquisition Executive prioritizes efforts for production, and we work collaboratively on production requirements increases over time, I do feel very, very comfortable that we're working collaboratively with our industry partners in terms of making sure that there's no degradation in support of current and future requirements. Feel very, very comfortable that we continue to mitigate any potential shortfalls based on the partnership with our industry partners. And as we look to the future, we continuously reassess our overall requirements by specific type of ammunition as we move into the future. If you don't mind, I'd like to turn it over very, very quickly over to General Gardner so he can give you just a little bit more perspective on it.
General Gardner?
sir, additionally, the quality that our manufacturers produce of really amazing munitions allows us to do a stockpile reliability program that a Joint Munitions Command will read every single munition ever produced in this country. Every 3 to 5 years, it's retested to make sure it performs as designed. When it doesn't, we go to industry to see, can it get a service life extension so that we maybe can make those missiles go longer, those rockets go longer, et cetera. And when we can't, sir, obviously that helps inform JPO on my right, General Boroff, on an acquisition strategy as we see it in advance of a deteriorating round so that we can maintain that reliability that you are concerned about. Over.
Sir, as far as the programmatic side for the production, in 2016, 2017, we identified we need to up the RDX and IMX. That's what you were referencing to. We're in 2025, we'll have those facilities done. We let 3 contracts last year. They'll be finishing around the 2024 timeframe. The last one we'll let this year to finish around the 2025 frame. But you can see how long it takes to take 8.5 million pounds per year to get to 15 million pounds a year for RDX, and for IMX going from 3 million pounds a year to 8 million pounds a year. It took us from 17, and we'll have it set in 25. But we are getting after it as we identify those. That was an OSD as a single manager conventional ammunition. They gave us direction, and we've been moving out ever since with the contractor.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Can I just follow up on for both, which Stinger's not in hot production, Javelin is, the propellants and explosives that are used in those are not unique just to those. We use them in many products.
Yes, sir, that is correct. We use them in many products.
Terrific. Mr. Carvajal, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine highlights the Army's need to increase ammunition production capacity at its production installations. As the Army conducts its facilities upgrade, it should also be alert to potential single points of failure in the supply chain, because operational readiness is critical. For example, the government-owned contractor-operated GOCO Holston Army Ammunition Plant in Tennessee produces the majority of explosives used in every lethal system within DoD, from bombs and missiles to hand grenades, mortars, and tank and artillery ammunition. General Baroff, what measures in the Army Ammunition Plant AAP modernization plan are being taken to reduce single point of failures at its ammunition production facility, and what additional redundancy measures, if any, should be considered?
Thank you very much for the question. That's a multi-part answer. As Honorable Bush said earlier, we're doing an analysis to see where those single points of failures are at. We've done that. We work very close with our OSD partners. And as we identify those, as an example, black powder became a single point of contact as in June of this year, we had an explosion, but it's the only source. We've gone back, and we've got a second source, which is Wano, powder out of Germany. That's our second source now. We're testing that, and Estes bought out the company, which is GoEx, and we're working with them using the Defense Production Act, Title III, which has funding by Congress to make sure we can stand up that single point of failure and get other sources, as Mr. Bush stated earlier.
Congressman, if I could make a quick comment.
Yes, please.
Congressman, I think the other key piece is that to add on to what General Baroff mentioned is building into the organic industrial-based modernization plan the ability to protect our ammunition plants from both kinetic threat as well as cyber threat. And so we mentioned as an example the increase in production that's forthcoming at Holston, and there's several other points of failure that, as you know very well, exist. But our efforts with investing for protection, I think, are robust in this plan, and our efforts with Army Cyber Command and other organizations to be able to protect upon potential threat in the cyber domain have been significant. And if you don't mind, General Gardner has about 30 seconds of an update he'd like to give you just to answer the other part of the question. Over.
Okay.
Sir, additionally, on top of the cyber activities, and again, we thank Congresses for their funding to enable us to get after the internal controls and other areas that might make us vulnerable in these facilities. It also becomes the efforts to increase water production and water treatment, because in order to expand capacity at Holston in particular, we know we have to upgrade the facilities there to go from 55 million gallons of water a day to maybe up to 100 million, which we'll take it in from the Holston River and turn it back in actually at the same quality, if not better than what we received it, but it'll support the production efforts and do the single points of failure mitigation. Over.
Thank you. The Army has been the single manager of conventional ammunition for DoD, providing central management of the conventional ammunitions for all the services. However, the Army's organic ammunition production industrial base requires critical infrastructure and manufacturing process upgrades to support the warfighter's current and future ammunition requirements. Address continued facility deterioration, increase in safety, and improve environmental compliance. Mr. Bush, do you believe there is sufficient funding to execute the AAP modernization plan? And what additional actions can be taken to accelerate critical upgrades to Army ammunition plants?
Yes, sir. So as far as the budget request before members, the sustained amount of $500 million per year would be historic for the Army in terms of investments in ammunition plants refurbishment. I believe there may be some opportunities for accelerating some of those projects, but these are multi-year projects. As General Baroff was mentioning, we are only now getting close to finishing some work that was done at Holston, started years ago. So I am comfortable with the levels we have in the budget as long as they're sustained across the 15 years General Daly was mentioning. That will get at our most critical items However, happy to talk to the committee and provide members with opportunities for acceleration of some of the future year's work if that's desired.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Deschalais. Dr. Deschalais, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for coming before us today. I'd like to spend some time today discussing the Holston Army Ammunition Plant in Kingsport, Tennessee. First, can you outline all the critical work that takes place at Holston and how their work supports the warfighter? And secondly, can you outline some of the issues that Holston currently faces as well and provide some history surrounding Holston's issues with meeting sufficient production capacity in the past?
Congressman, thank you for that question. I would categorize Holston as absolutely critical and essential to the Army's organic industrial base and to supporting the warfighter each and every day. In terms of explosives and the products that are manufactured there, capability is absolutely critical. When you talk about specific upgrades to get to the levels that General Boroff talked about in terms of RDX, HMX, and IMX, behind that are several different projects that really will support Holston into the future. And so I'd like to turn it over to General Gardner and General Boroff to just hit some of those from the standpoint of production and then support of the infrastructure as well.
So, sir, your question about what it supports, basically every type of bomb, hand grenade, tank round, et cetera, the explosives produced at Holston will go to those, and it goes across all of our joint partners. So setting the base, whether it's water distribution, water treatment, it's very hard to do work acids without water. And so what you'll see in this modernization plan is a detailed plan to get after water and to safely return water as needed back to the environment in the Holston River. Additionally, will be additional storage capability for acids and our ability to store acids in order to meet the production requirements over time. And the last is to get after drying, which is one of our most dangerous operations. And you'll see that we are modernizing the drying activities at Holston. Over.
Thank you very much, sir. As was said earlier, the explosives are key to us. The 2016-2017 bill we talked about earlier to bring those were U.S. Air Force requirements. So as the single manager of conventional ammunition, we look across all of DOD. So it's not just the Army's munition. This goes in almost all the munitions across the whole OSD. So the importance can't be overstated. They're critical, and we're proud of all the work they do there.
Thank you. In reviewing the current modernization strategy, it does not seem clear to me that enough recognition is given to the challenge of simultaneously executing these massive modernization projects while also meeting production levels. How do you engage with your contractor counterparts to make these decisions concerning cost, schedule, production rates in order to maintain this balance of today's production demands and new construction needs?
That is a very hard balance, and that is very difficult for us. We work very closely with the operating contractor to make sure we maintain it, because as you said, and as you can discern from this conversation, they can't stop production. It's critical for the Department of Defense. Balancing those two is key, and probably we work very close with OEM, and they'll have the distinguished body that they can address that from their perspectives. But that balance is key with the government. We have to manage our expectations, and we manage their expectations, but partnering together is how we make it through that, Congressman.
Congressman, I would just tell you, to give you the confidence of the validity and the feasibility of the 15-year modernization plan, great collaboration with our industry partners, 18 months of work to get here, and very well, I think, synchronized and orchestrated so that we balance between infrastructure improvements and continued production. We'll reassess that every year in our process so that we don't get into a situation where we have a degradation in the ability of the organic industrial base to produce the munitions required.
Okay, thank you. This may be a better question for the contractor panel, but I know my colleague Diana Harshberger, who represents Kingsport, Tennessee, and I share a concern at how the workforce is being taken into account in these modernizations. These communities have a bond with these workers, and there's often generational families involved. How are you considering and balancing these relationships as you look to modernize these AAPs to improve safety and efficiency?
So, sir, what I would tell you is that people are centered to everything that we do at these facilities, and so we work hand in hand with our contractors as we bring on modernization efforts. It really becomes how are we going to, I won't use the term modernize, but how do we increase the talent of our workforce so that they can execute the new processes and implementations that we're going to do at these facilities. So it's a hand-in-hand requirement, and so that we get ahead of that, so we train the force, we prepare the force as we bring in these new modernization efforts, and I can guarantee the teammates behind me do that as well as part of this plan.
And Congressman, I would just tell you that as we talk about minimizing human exposure to hazards through robotics and remote operational processes, we're really not talking about reducing the workforce. We're talking about realigning the workforce accordingly. Feel very, very comfortable that we'll continue to recruit, retain, train, and treat our great artisan workforce the same way we have for years, and understanding the importance of what they provide the Army and the Joint Force.
Thank you all for your great work. Thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm extremely concerned about some of the budget numbers that I've seen from the Department of Defense. We heard yesterday from General Walters about the potential need to change our force posture in Europe. However, we're also supposed to simultaneously keep the Indo-Pacific as our priority theater. The budget documentation that was sent to my office from the Army states that the FY23 decrease in funding for research, development, and acquisition is due to a reduced requirement for ammunition replenishment. I agree with looking at ways to save money, but we need to do it responsibly and in the appropriate manner. Mr. Bush, does the budget give you what you need for these modernization efforts? And do you believe that the Army is expecting Congress to add funding like we had to do last year when this is all ultimately over? And lastly, after the drawdown in Afghanistan, are there any U.S. stockpiles of ammunition that we are able to draw from that have contributed to the reduced requirement of ammunition replenishment?
Sir, if I could answer in a couple parts. If I could first talk to the money provided by Congress for production. So this is the money that flows into the base. So the Army very much appreciates approximately $100 million that was added to the budget in '22 for additional ammunition production that'll flow into our plants. A second source of funds to assist there will be the funding I mentioned regarding Mrs. Hartzler's question about replenishing munitions provided to Ukraine. That will be additional funding that will flow through the plants that will help. And then, Congressman, your question about '23, that is, of course, up to members to judge whether we hit the target. The Army does, in every year, have to balance across its accounts to prioritize certain things over others. And every year we want to work with Congress to make sure they understand where we accepted risk, and so members can make their judgments about whether we got that right. I'm happy to do that, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bush. I appreciate that. One more question. In 2018, Army Futures Command was established in the great state of Texas. Army Futures Command oversees the cross-functional teams that help address the Army's modernization priorities, such as future vertical lift, long-range precision fire, and soldier lethality. General Boroff, how does the Joint Program Executive Office for Armaments and Ammunition work with the cross-functional teams to ensure that our modernization efforts are in line with the research and development being conducted by Army Futures Command?
Thank you very much. We work very closely, to answer your question, with the CFTs, the respective CFTs. We're in line as they design the new ammunition for the long-range precision fires. We'll build those rounds. We'll build piece parts for those rounds in Scranton. We'll take them to Iowa, and we'll do load assembly and pack there. So we'll use our entire industrial base to do that. Next generation squad weapon, you mentioned soldier lethality. That falls under them. We're building a new plant out in Missouri, in Lake City. So those are positive things as we move forward. We're going to demolish an old building, build a new facility, work with the winning contractor once they're identified, to build the ammo plants there. We're building all the projectiles for whomever wins out of our facilities now at Lake City. Then we'll start doing the rounds there, probably around 26, 28 time frame, sir.
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate all of you taking time to be here today, and I look forward to working with each of you and with my colleagues on the committee here to provide our young men and women in the armed services the training, the resources they need to accomplish their mission. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. we're going to wrap up this section. There's certainly a lot. You're good, Don? Okay. I want to thank, absolutely. I want to thank our colleagues, some great questions, a number of things that we're going to have to dig deeper into. The study that Mr. Whitman talked about, absolutely, those stockpiles critically, but they also pointed out that much of those who are out of date are ones that aren't first on our list, second on our list, but the fact of the matter is we need to be ready to ramp up, and you bring up a great point. Ms. Sherrill talked about the rare earth materials. When we were up at Picatinny with General Malone at the time, we had a list of those at-risk materials, and we'd look to get an update on that, and maybe we'll follow up by going up there. But again, we appreciate it. Modernization plan, we're glad we have it. The risk that is involved, the single point of failures, and the idea that you're going to reevaluate each year. But in the event that something does go wrong and there is a failure, those backup plans are critical. Stockpiles, age depends. So I want to thank each of you for being with us today. And this phase of our hearing will adjourn, and we'll bring up our next witnesses. Thank you.